please subscribe and share for more story. At exactly 6:14 a.m., the old mahogany door of Marian Holt's ancestral home began to tremble under a violent assault. The sound wasn't a knock, nor a desperate plea. It was the terrifying, rhythmic boom of a sledgehammer smashing into wood that had guarded her family for more than a century. Through the pale Savannah morning mist, she heard her daughter-in-law screaming her name, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Marian, open this door right now. I know you changed the locks. This is illegal. You can't do this to us." The artificial sweetness Tessa had worn for months was gone, replaced by the raw panic of someone finally losing control. Marian stood barefoot in the foyer, the marble floor cool beneath her feet, each violent strike sending vibrations up through the house and into her bones. Her heart pounded frantically, but her hands, aged, lined, and familiar, remained perfectly steady. The fear that had ruled her life for 6 long months had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, focused anger that felt almost medicinal. She glanced at the grandfather clock Arthur had restored decades ago. It read 6:16. She needed only 14 more minutes, 14 minutes, to hold the line before everything changed. Marian kept her eyes on the grandfather clock as another thunderous strike hit the door, this time hard enough to rattle the stained glass side panel. Her son, Daniel, shouted from outside, his tone sharp with desperation. "Mom, I swear I'll break this whole door down if you don't open it." The words pierced her, not because of their force, but because of the voice behind them. The same voice that once begged for bedtime stories and comfort after nightmares. Now it carried entitlement and fury, a stranger's voice wearing her son's shape. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself. She had trained for this moment, hardened herself for it, stripped away every illusion of who her son had become. It was 6:17. Mr. Harding, her attorney, was due at 6:30. Her task was simple. Endure. 14 minutes. To stand firm, to refuse to crumble under the weight of guilt or maternal instinct. Her fingers brushed the brass lock she had installed only hours earlier. She had paid triple for the emergency midnight installation, but it was worth every cent. That lock wasn't just metal. It was the first boundary she had set in years. A boom shook the frame again. Marian whispered to herself, "Hold on, just a little longer." A deep voice rose behind her, calm and steady as stone. "I'll handle it, Mrs. Holt." Marian didn't startle. She turned to see Grant Harding, immaculate in a charcoal suit, standing like a silent sentinel in the dim hallway. He had entered through the sunroom exactly as planned. His posture radiated certainty, the type of confidence that made enemies falter without a word. He snapped his pocket watch shut. "Open it, Marian. Let them see exactly what they've done." She nodded once, feeling strength flow back into her body. She gripped the cold brass of the deadbolt, slid it open, and pulled the heavy door inward. The scene outside froze like a painting. Daniel's chest heaved, sweat dripping down his brow, the sledgehammer raised mid-strike. Tessa stood beside him, mascara streaked across her cheeks, her face twisted with fury. But the moment they saw Grant, the most feared estate attorney in the region, they blanched. The sledgehammer slipped from Daniel's hand, hitting the porch with a dull thud. The neighborhood birds chirped faintly in the silence that followed. Tessa's throat bobbed nervously. They recognized the man who had just stepped behind Marian, and in that instant, they understood. The power dynamic had shifted forever. But before Marian allowed herself to savor the moment, she knew the story couldn't begin here. The resolve she now carried, the steel in her spine, was nude. It hadn't existed 6 months ago. Then, she had been lonely, grieving, and too willing to offer unconditional love without boundaries. She had been the version of herself who believed that family could never become predators, who thought sacrifice guaranteed loyalty. She knew better now. Her transformation hadn't come from strength, but from betrayal. And betrayal, she realized, was a sharper teacher than grief. If anyone were to understand why a 72-year-old mother barricaded her own child from her home, they needed the full truth. Every concession she made, every wound she swallowed, every small piece of herself she surrendered until nothing remained but a shell. The path to this porch, this sledgehammer, this confrontation, began on a quiet rainy Tuesday in November. She had been in her kitchen brewing Earl Grey, listening to the soft tap of rain against the window, when her phone rang. That sound had changed everything. The caller had been Daniel, his voice tight and strained in a way she recognized immediately. It was the tone of a man hiding something. He asked to come over right away, bringing Tessa and the children. Marian's heart sank. A mother's instinct never fades. An hour later, they arrived, Daniel avoiding her eyes, Tessa looking theatrically devastated, and the two children dragging backpacks much too full for a simple visit. They gathered in the living room, surrounded by the memories Marian and her late husband, Robert, had built together. Tessa began to cry softly, dabbing at her eyes as she delivered the news. "We lost the house, Marian. The bank foreclosed. We have to be out by Friday." The words shattered Marian. She looked at the children. Leo, 14 and withdrawn, and little Mira, clutching her backpack like a lifeline. Her heart cracked. "You'll stay here," Marian said immediately. She didn't ask how it happened. She didn't question the luxury vacations, the new cars, the unexplained business failures. None of it mattered in that moment. She simply acted as a mother. "This is your home. There's plenty of space." Tessa threw her arms around her, sobbing with relief. "You saved us, Marian, just for a few months, until we get back on our feet." Marian had believed her. The first 2 weeks felt almost magical. The house brimmed with life again. Marian cooked the meals Daniel loved as a boy: roast chicken, baked casseroles, warm biscuits. The children's laughter echoed through the halls, stirring memories she thought had died with Robert. She felt needed again, anchored again, alive again. But predators don't strike when they arrive. They wait. They soften the ground before they attack. The first red flag appeared in week 3. Marian returned from book club to find the living room completely rearranged, her velvet wingback chair, the one Robert bought for her on their 30th anniversary, was gone, and its place sat a stiff beige thing with no personality. Tessa greeted her with a bright smile. "Do you like it? We moved your old chair to the garage. It wasn't good for your back. This is ergonomic, much better." Marian blinked, stunned. "But I loved that chair. Robert gave it to me." Tessa's smile didn't shift, but her eyes did, cooling like shadow. "Marian, you really must let go of the past. It's unhealthy. We're just helping you. Besides, the room was so cluttered." Marian swallowed her hurt. She thanked her for thinking of her health. But that night, as she sat in the beige chair, her back aching, she felt the first sting of erasure. By December, the intrusion had spread beyond furniture to every corner of Marian's life. Tessa took control of the kitchen, announcing that Marian's cooking was too heavy for someone her age. She tossed out Marian's butter, her cream, her spices, every flavor that reminded Marian of home, and replaced them with quinoa, kale, and almond milk. When Marian tried to make Christmas cookies with Mira, Tessa swooped in, snatching the bowl away. "Too much sugar," she scolded, dumping the batter into the trash. Myra's eyes filled with disappointment. "We don't want Grandma getting sick, do we?" Tessa added loudly. For the first time, the phrase appeared, the one that would become Tessa's favorite weapon: "At your age." They spoke to Marian more slowly, as if she were suddenly hard of hearing. They made decisions without her, rearranged rooms without asking, criticized her diet, her clothes, even how she folded towels. The house felt less like a sanctuary and more like a place she was renting from strangers. Then came the worst blow, the erasing of Robert. She returned from visiting her sister to find the hallway stripped bare. Robert's beloved landscape paintings were gone, replaced by cold gray walls. "Where are the paintings?" she whispered. Daniel barely looked up. "Storage. The frames were rotting." He said it casually, as if he hadn't just ripped out her heart. The grief came fast, crushing, silent. Marian cried alone in her room that night. Her home had begun to feel unfamiliar, its warmth drained, its memories boxed and hidden, but she pushed the pain down. She told herself it was temporary. She wanted her family close, wanted Daniel to succeed, wanted the children to feel safe. She ignored the voice inside her begging her to pay attention. Then, in January, everything shifted. The emotional manipulation transformed into something colder, Strategic, IT began. When Tessa started claiming severe headaches, she spent days in bed, moaning faintly whenever Marian passed the door. Daniel carried himself with exaggerated exhaustion, sighing deeply as if bearing impossible burdens. "Mom," he finally said over a dinner of bland vegetables, "we need to talk." "It's Tessa. She saw a specialist. It's serious." Marian's fork paused midair. "Is she all right?" Daniel rubbed his face dramatically. "There's a clinic in Switzerland, experimental treatment, high success rate, but it's not covered by insurance." Marian's stomach twisted. "How much?" 150,000. The number stole her breath. IT was nearly everything she had saved for the future, but Tessa was the mother of her grandchildren, and Marian's empathy outran her caution. "A life is worth more than money," Marian whispered. "I'll go to the bank tomorrow." 2 weeks later, Tessa flew to Switzerland. Daniel remained home with the children, pacing the house constantly, speaking in hushed tones on the phone. The atmosphere felt different, quieter but unsettled. Then fate intervened. Marian ran into Mrs. Harrow at the grocery store, the woman who knew everything about everyone in Savannah. "I saw your daughter-in-law yesterday," Mrs. Harrow chirped. "She looks wonderful." Marian nearly dropped the milk carton. "Tessa? But she's in Switzerland. She's very ill." Mrs. Harrow frowned. "Ill? Honey, she walked out of the Azure Spa in Atlanta, and my niece works there. She said Tessa had a full cosmetic surgery package. Nose job, liposuction, tummy tuck, the works." The world spun. Marian stood frozen in the aisle, hearing nothing but the echo of betrayal. Her savings, Robert's savings, had been spent on vanity, not survival. She drove home in silence. Her hands shook. She felt the truth forming, terrible and heavy. If they lied once, they could lie again. If they stole once, they could steal more. She did not confront Daniel, not yet. She needed proof. More importantly, she needed to understand just how deep the deception went. That night, clarity arrived in the form of an old baby monitor stored in the attic. She set up the monitor in her bedroom, hiding the transmitter behind bookshelves in the living room. That evening, as if summoned by fate, Tessa returned early from treatment, bruised but noticeably slimmer, her voice nasal from surgery. They didn't know Marian listened from her darkened bedroom, clutching the speaker as their voices spilled out tinny but unmistakable. "She suspects nothing," Tessa said, laughing softly. "She bought the whole sick act." Daniel replied calmly, "We have to move fast. The surgery money is gone. We need the real payout. The house is worth $5 million easy." Marian's breath stopped. "But she won't sell," Tessa snapped. "She's obsessed with this old place." "Which is why," Daniel said, "we stick to the plan, but we keep gaslighting her. Hiding her keys, moving her things, making her think she's forgetting. We build a case for dementia. BY summer, we get power of attorney. Then we put her in that state-run facility, Shady Acres." Tessa burst into laughter. "That dump, it smells like cabbage." "Who cares?" Daniel shrugged. "It's free. Once she's inside, the house is ours. Do we sell it, buy the Miami penthouse, and start our real life? She's had hers long enough." The words sliced through Marian. She turned off the monitor and sat in silence, mourning the son she thought she had. Marian sat in the darkness long after the monitor fell silent, her hands resting on her lap, her pulse strangely calm. She had expected heartbreak, but what she felt instead was a quiet, focused awakening. The version of herself who made endless excuses for Daniel, who believed loyalty was reciprocated simply because it was offered, died in that bedroom. That night she chose strategy over emotion. She knew confrontation would fail. They would twist her words, call her confused, use her reaction as proof of the very dementia they planned to fabricate. She planned. She rose early the next morning and drove 3 towns over to meet Grant Harding in a quiet corner of a cafe. He listened to the recording without interrupting, his jaw tightening as the conversation played. "This is criminal," he said coldly. "Elder fraud, conspiracy, financial abuse. We can bury them legally." Marian shook her head. "I don't want revenge. Grant, I want protection, and I want this house protected forever, and I want them out." Grant leaned forward. understanding her resolve. Then we build your escape. We do this quietly. You act confused. Let them think they're winning. IT makes the trap cleaner. For the first time in months, Marian felt powerful. She would not be their victim. She would be their reckoning. The following week, Marian performed her role flawlessly. She pretended to lose her glasses, asked Daniel the same question repeatedly, stared at the microwave as if forgetting how it worked. She saw Daniel and Tessa exchange pleased glances, their confidence growing like mold. They whispered more freely, lowered their guard, completely convinced that their plan was succeeding. On Thursday evening, Marian set the bait. "Daniel," she murmured during dinner, her voice trembling with convincing fragility. "I've been thinking, this house, it's too much for me. Did I get confused sometimes? Maybe a facility would be better. Maybe you were right." Tessa nearly dropped her fork. "Marian, are you sure? We just want you safe." Marian nodded timidly. "I don't want the house to be a burden. If I sign it over to you now, you won't have to deal with taxes later. We can call Mr. Harding Monday morning." Daniel's breath hitched. Greed flickered openly in his eyes. He grabbed her hand with exaggerated sympathy. "Mom, that's very brave. We'll take care of everything." Marian smiled, soft and convincing, while inside her resolve hardened further. They spent the entire weekend packing boxes, measuring windows, and planning renovations. They had no idea they were celebrating their own downfall. On Sunday night, while Daniel and Tessa slept, Marian made her move. At exactly 3 a.m., the locksmith she had hired arrived silently. He replaced every lock, the front door, the side entrance, the garage keypad, even the basement hatch. Marian paid him in cash and thanked him with a steady voice. At dawn, Daniel and Tessa left for an early spin class, giddy with anticipation for their supposed inheritance. The moment their SUV disappeared down the long drive, Marian bolted every door. She stood in the foyer, breathing deeply, reclaiming her home inch by inch. When Grant arrived, he carried with him the documents that secured everything, the trust that protected the house forever, the clause ensuring it could never be sold, the life estate ensuring Marian could never be removed. They moved through the house, checking every lock, preparing for the confrontation to come. When the first sledgehammer strike hit the door later that morning, Marian didn't flinch. She had done all she could. Now the rest would unfold exactly as planned. The predators would discover they had walked willingly into a cage of their own making, which led to the confrontation on the porch, Grant standing tall behind her, Daniel frozen with a sledgehammer mid-swing, and Tessa shrinking in sudden recognition of the legal power facing them. When Grant pulled out the trust documents, Daniel's face crumpled. "What do you mean it can't be sold?" he stammered. Grant's tone was crisp. "The Holt Heritage Trust now owns this property. Mrs. Holt holds a life estate. She lives here until her passing. The home then transfers to her grandchildren. There is also an integrity clause. Any attempt to sell the property transfers ownership to the Savannah Historical Society." Tessa screeched. "You tricked us, Marian. You promised to sign it over." Grant raised an eyebrow. "She promised nothing. You assumed." He handed over another document. "And regarding the $150,000 used for cosmetic surgery under false medical pretenses, that qualifies as wire fraud." Tessa went pale, her breath hitching as if someone had crushed her ribs. Marian stepped forward, her voice steady. "I heard everything. Daniel on the baby monitor. You called me a burden. You said I'd lived long enough." Daniel shook his head wildly. "Mom, I didn't mean it. I was stressed." Marian cut him off sharply. "Do not lie to me again." The porch fell silent. Tears flooded Daniel's eyes as he dropped to his knees, clutching the hem of Marian's robe. "Mom, please, we have nowhere to go. We're broke. Please don't do this." Marian stared down at him, seeing not her son but the man who had plotted her destruction. "You have 1 hour," she said quietly. "Police are on standby. Pack only your personal things. Everything purchased with my money stays." Tessa's rage exploded. "You can't do this. We're family." Marian's voice remained calm. "Family doesn't gaslight its elders. Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't plan to lock a mother in a state home." Daniel broke fully, sobbing, collapsing into himself. "Where are we supposed to go?" he whimpered. Marian inhaled, steady and sad. "I don't know. But you are young, you are healthy, you'll figure it out. Consider this the consequence of the life you tried to build on my back." She stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her, leaving Grant to supervise what remained of the eviction. She felt no triumph and revenge, just clarity. It was time, past time, to reclaim everything they had stripped from her. Exactly 58 minutes later, Daniel and Tessa emerged with suitcases, supervised by 2 members of Grant's security team. Tessa ranted on her phone, pacing wildly, her voice shaking with fury. Daniel looked defeated, hollow, shrinking beneath the weight of choices he had made. They loaded their suitcases into their leased SUV and drove away without looking back, except for Daniel, who paused for one long, broken moment before lowering his head. The moment the SUV disappeared beyond the oak line drive, a profound silence settled over the property. Not the lonely silence of the past 6 months, but a clean, new one. Marian stood at the window, one hand on the warm glass, feeling the first real breath of peace she'd had in months. She did not smile. She simply existed, fully, quietly, completely in her own home again for the first time since she let them in. The house felt like hers. That afternoon, Marian visited the storage unit Grant had forced Daniel to reveal. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, tears welling instantly. There were Robert's paintings, leaning against the wall in neat rows. There were his books, his framed medals, the antique clock they wound together every Christmas. Every stolen memory was still intact, quietly waiting for rescue. She loaded her car carefully, refusing to allow a single frame to be scratched. When she returned home, she spent hours restoring the hallway, paint cans, brushes, old sheets. It felt like reclaiming her soul. Color by color, stroke by stroke, she erased the cold gray Tessa had chosen and replaced it with a warm peach, the color of sunrise, of renewal, of beginnings. By evening, the hallway glowed. She brought her velvet wingback chair back from the garage, wiped it down, and set it beside the window. Exhausted, she sank into it, the familiar softness embracing her like an old friend. For the first time in months, she felt whole. The days that followed weren't perfect. There were moments when Marian cried for the son she once loved. There were nights she second-guessed herself, wondering if she had failed him somehow. But each time doubt surfaced, she replayed the recording in her mind. The callous laughter, the cold planning, the casual cruelty. It reminded her. She hadn't failed Daniel. He had failed the goodness she raised him with. The grandchildren, Leo and Mira, began visiting on weekends, riding their bikes up the driveway. They seemed relieved, lighter, freer, away from the chaos in their parents' small rental apartment. They baked cookies with Marian, painted, played board games, and asked gentle questions about their grandfather. She answered honestly, giving them the pieces of family history Daniel and Tessa had tried to erase. She promised them they would always have a home with her, and she meant it. Slowly, the house filled with laughter again. Not the forced brightness Tessa demanded, but genuine warmth. And 3 months later, Marian received a letter from Daniel. At first, her heart leapt, perhaps an apology, perhaps reflection, but when she opened it, she found only a plea for money. "Just a small loan," he wrote, "to help us get on our feet." No apology, and accountability, and acknowledgement of what he had done. Just entitlement dressed as desperation. Marian folded the letter calmly, walked outside, and dropped it into the compost bin. It would serve better as fertilizer for her roses than as an attempt at reconciliation. The act didn't fill her with bitterness. It filled her with clarity. The old Marian would have rushed to rescue him. The new Marian understood that saving him now would only rebuild the man who tried to destroy her. She had already given him life. She would not give him her dignity. 2. Over time, Marian discovered a truth she wished she had learned much earlier. Dignity is not something others grant. It is something one builds with boundaries and self-respect. She began waking each morning with renewed purpose. She tended her garden, repainted rooms Tessa had stripped of color, restored antiques, and read books without interruption. She rediscovered her independence with a quiet joy. There were lonely moments, yes, but they were clean, honest loneliness. not the suffocating loneliness of being surrounded by people who wished her gone. She realized that reclaiming her home was not just about protecting walls and furniture. It was about reclaiming her identity. She no longer lived in fear of being erased by those she loved most. She lived for herself, for the woman she still was, and the woman she was becoming. Her neighbors whispered, of course, Savannah always talked, but as the truth slowly emerged through legal filings and quiet conversations, whispers turned to admiration. People began to say Marian Holt had done what many elders were too afraid to do: stand up, draw boundaries, and refuse to be exploited. The community began checking in on her, bringing pies, offering to help repaint fences, asking if she needed anything. She declined most offers, but she appreciated them. Her story spread quietly, a cautionary tale wrapped in courage. And when Leo and Mira visited, they carried themselves with pride as they walked through the house they knew would one day belong to them, not through theft, but through legacy. Marian often found herself sitting in Robert's wingback chair at sunset, the hallway glowing peach around her. She would sip Earl Grey and watch the light shift across the paintings now restored to their rightful place. You'd be proud, she whispered sometimes, imagining Robert's gentle smile. She didn't imagine him disappointed, not anymore. She knew what she had done wasn't cruelty. It was justice, and more importantly, it was survival. The more she reflected, the clearer it became. Loving someone does not require sacrificing yourself at their altar. Family is sacred, yes, but not all are worthy of the temple. She forgave herself for the years she failed to set boundaries. She forgave herself for not seeing the warning signs sooner. She forgave herself for loving Daniel so blindly, but forgiveness did not mean welcoming destruction back, and it meant letting the lesson become part of her strength. Spring arrived with soft breezes, blooming azaleas, and long afternoons spent with her grandchildren. Marian taught Leo how to prune roses and Mira how to knead biscuit dough. They painted birdhouses, restored old picture frames, and explored the attic for forgotten treasures. The children talked openly about their parents' arguments, the financial stress, the tension that hovered in their small apartment. Marian listened without judgment. She never spoke ill of Daniel or Tessa. Instead, she gently guided the children toward resilience and self-worth. She wanted them to understand that their value wasn't tied to wealth or houses or the approval of broken adults. She wanted them to inherit more than the Holt estate. She wanted them to inherit integrity. Bone warm afternoon. Leo asked quietly, "Grandma, will Dad ever come back here?" Marian paused, considering her words carefully. "The door is open to those who respect the person standing inside it," she said softly. "If your father chooses to change, truly change, then we can talk, but until then, this house must stay peaceful." Leo nodded, processing the complexity with a maturity far beyond his years. "I like it better here," he admitted. "It feels safe." Marian brushed a hand over his shoulder, her heart full. "It should," she murmured. "Home should feel safe. That's why I fought for it." For the first time, she realized her battle had not been solely for herself. It had been for the generations who came after, the ones who needed to understand that legacy is built on courage, not fear. Months later, Marian stood at her front door at sunrise, unlocking it just as she did every morning. The Savannah sun streamed through, warming the floors Robert had polished by hand decades earlier.